All right, folks, welcome back to the channel. You found us here at KGB Customs, home of some of the best custom gun content on the web. We share these custom guns in hopes of sharing some knowledge and to catalog some of the great pieces that come through our shop. Thanks for joining in. Today we've got a classic. If you know what that logo is, you know it's a Heinie. Richard Heinie has been building guns for quite some time, still in his shop daily from what I understand. This pistol comes from very early in his career, very early in his journey. This pistol here is RH16, Richard Heinie number 16. Richard Heinie started numbering his pistols very, very early on in his career. And numbered them in sequential order up until today. I think he was up over 600 the last I knew. Many of those built in the last, from 1990 to 2010, I would say. And this one being number 16, I can tell you, because I have the paperwork, scan of Heinie's original book here. The pistol was finished and picked up in March of 1978. In 1978, Heinie was just getting his name out there, certainly more so in the local scene. A lot of law enforcement officers relied on him to keep their guns running, and he got some write-ups in American Handgunner in those days, and that really catapulted him to the forefront. He started building, competition guns and stuff like that, as comp guns were fairly well known, certainly in the Illinois area and by others, after he got one on the silver screen in the 80s, and the Miami Vice show had one of his compensated builds featured in it pretty prominently. This gun comes before all that. This gun is very clearly done in the Armand Swenson style. Armand was one of Dick's very early, I don't want to say mentors, but a guy he really looked up to, and a guy whose work he studied quite a bit, as you can see looking at this build. Heinie, in an interview, once said that his biggest influences were Armand Swenson and Jim Hogue, which are two, certainly two kings to look up to, especially in the late 70s, early 90s, or early 80s, when Heinie was really getting into the industry. This pistol features a lot of the, common combat modifications that Swenson made famous, starting, of course, with the most obvious. We've got a red ramp front sight that's staked and soldered in place, and then we've got a white outline Smith & Wesson K-frame sight. To include a shear pin, an additional shear pin in there, so that if the screw that held down the leaf were to shear off from recoil and use, the shear pin would hold it in place, and the sight wouldn't fly off the slide. That was something that Swenson certainly pioneered. It was the first I knew of putting a shear pin in them, and I believe he started doing it in the 60s. The slide top has been nicely matted. There's also been a flat top machined prior to the matting. The matting, I would say, is a bit more coarse than what Armand used, but clearly the look that Heinie was going for was that Swenson look. Included is a French border machined or engraved on the top of the flat to separate the smooth flat side from the textured slide top. One thing that really stood out to me was the finely checkered rear of the slide, really beautifully done. We've got a Barstow match barrel, common for the day. That's what, if guys weren't welding up Colt barrels, that's what they were using. Got a chrome plated Colt magazine, as you would expect. Internals all nicely tuned, a combat reliability tune, as most guys would have called it back in the day. Of course, we've got a Armand Swenson safety there. Interestingly, that safety does not have the city on it, just says AD Swenson, California, which means that this safety was probably 6 or 8 years old when Heinie installed it. That doesn't mean much. A lot of guys have extra parts on the wall, or you know, find it laying around or in a different gun, or maybe it was in this gun before he built it. You know, the safety could have been in the stock pistol before it got to Heinie. This gun, we'll see if I can pop it apart here. I don't know if I'll be able to. Has a I believe a 77 dated Barstow in it. And of course, the bottom of the slide, RH16 and Heinie stamped in there. This is an early Barstow barrel. The early Barstow barrels and bushings had a 5-finger collet bushing, which this gun has. And that collet bushing was similar to the Colt Accurizer bushing, Colt's collet bushing, except it had an additional finger. There was one finger that was extra wide, and then, 4 others. And say what you will about collet bushings, but they do work as advertised. They do make for an accurate gun. Can they break? Absolutely. Can they lock up a gun? Also, yes. Though it wasn't common, it did happen. And a lot of the issues with them stemmed from guys who didn't know how to take them apart without damaging them. This gun has Heinie's earlier style checkering, is not the bordered checkering. This is the Swenson style checkering, where it wraps the sides of the frame and has just a double line border at the top. Again, very similar to Armand's work. Even the end of the full-length guide rod is finely checkered there, which I thought was a cute touch. The gun's had a nice mild dehorn done on it, of course, lowered and flared the ejection port. Just a great early example from one of the early masters, Richard Heinie. Of course, by, 1980, he all but stopped installing Smith & Wesson K-frame sights, unless the guy really wanted one. At that point, he was on to using Bomars and, of course, his fixed sights, which he was designing at the time. He was probably working on them already when he built this gun. But he had them into production by the early 80s. Nice opened up magwell there for tactical reloads. The arched mainspring housing has been checkered. Just a nice display of early work. And we'll tell you a little bit off of this paperwork here what he has written down. Accurize, which would of course include the Barstow barrel, tightening the frame and slide, etc. Trigger job, that kind of thing. Smith & Wesson sights, orange front with a white outline rear, stipple top of slide, bevel magwell, checker front strap, checker rear of slide, ambidextrous safety, spring guide, which the guide rod in this gun is a custom piece too, of which I've never seen before, ejection port work, hard chrome, and checker mainspring housing. That pretty much wraps it up. The gun is a classic piece from a classic shop, and one I was honored to get to handle. This pistol was in Richard's collection for a number of years, and just recently had been released by him, and I was blessed to get the opportunity to bring it to market and show it off to you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you would, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Share this stuff with your gun friends. We appreciate y'all tuning in. And check out the links at the end here for other videos you might like. Thanks.